So historically, most appeals within the VA system, at some point, if you keep appealing, end up at the Board of Veterans Appeals. It's an administrative court with authority over the Department of Veteran Affairs or the Veterans Benefits Administration and their adjudicators. So administrative judges have authority over VA employees and their decisions. There's two different jurisdictions historically. The old system was known as Legacy Appeals. The new system is known as the Appeals Modernization Act. And you can check some of our other topics that we've spoken to, and I address that in more detail in those topics. But what I want to talk about today is going to be the types of decisions that a board judge can actually issue you, and the type of response expected, the type of response that we would take on your behalf, or the type of response if you're trying to represent yourself that you need to take the action. So there's really three things you can get from a board judge: a denial, a grant, or a remand. So I'm going to talk about each one of those in a little bit of detail. So if an award is granted, if a decision or an issue is granted, for example, let's call it service connection for the right knee. If it's granted, there's no action needed. But I'm going to elaborate that in a second. So if it's granted, we're happy, fully favorable. If it's denied, you have one of two options usually. You can appeal to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, and that's your only option under the Legacy Appeals jurisdiction. If you opted in your case into the Appeals Modernization Act, which is to suggest if you received your decision that was initially appealed following February 19th of 2019, your case would be under the Appeals Modernization Act. And there again, if you are in AMA and you receive a denial of a decision from a board judge, your two options are this. Number one, you have 4 months or 120 days to appeal to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. That's a federal court, a constitutional authority type of court that has the authority to tell an administrative court whether they believe they made a mistake or not. They have authority over the administrative courts. So you either have 120 days to appeal to the CAVC, or alternatively, under AMA, you have the option to submit a supplemental claim and appeal within 1 year of the board judge's decision. Again, that supplemental claim is only an option if you're under the Appeals Modernization Act, which is to suggest that the initial decision you received came after February 19, 2019. Under Legacy, which is the old system that was in place for decades, your only option was to appeal directly to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. So the Legacy appeal structure was linear, and the Appeals Modernization Act is more of a bifurcated appeals approach, and it gives you the option to choose which lane you want to appeal in. If it's denied, and if you submit a supplemental claim under the Board of Veterans Appeals decision under the Appeals Modernization Act, again, we're going to use the same hypothetical. If the right knee was denied service connection, your only options to get typically is to get a medical opinion from a doctor and to submit that supplemental claim back to the VA. Otherwise, you got to go to the CAVC. Alternatively, if you're diagnosed with maybe a chronic condition, under 3.309, which shows chronic conditions, arthritis, if arthritis manifests to a compensable degree within 1 year of separation, which means you had symptoms and an x-ray showed that you had degenerative changes. And then you might be able to just show, hey, you guys, here's an x-ray, you guys didn't notice this, but I had arthritis within a year of separation. But generally speaking, when you get a denial from a board judge, those are your options. And lastly, I would suggest maybe the most common type of decision that a board judge issues is going to be a remand. And that's a functional equivalent of a judge punting, saying I'm not going to make a decision today. I'm going to punt, I'm going to kick the can down the road, and we'll readdress it after certain things are done. You see this a lot when the judge believes that the C&P examination that was scheduled by the VA for the veteran, when they believe that there's flaws with it. Maybe they thought there was a bias by the examiner. Maybe they thought that the examiner failed in their duty to review the entirety of the record. Maybe there are certain omissions that should have been stated. Whatever, or maybe the VA failed to procure certain records. Whatever the case, a remand isn't a denial, so you can't appeal a remand to the federal court because it's not a denial. Your only option is to wait for the VA to execute the judge's remand instructions, which might be schedule a new exam, or might be, hey, reach out to the one of the federal entities to procure more records on the veteran's behalf to do their duty to assist. So again, those are the three decisions. We're talking about types of decisions a board judge can issue. Number one, it's a fully favorable or it's a grant of a benefit. Number two, it's a denial. And number three, it's a remand. And it's not uncommon, one decision, you'll get every one of those types of decisions within it. So for example, if you had 9 issues before a judge, they might grant 3, they might deny 3, and they might kick the can down the road with a remand on 3. And sometimes you might choose different lanes from there as to how you're going to appeal those decisions. As far as following a hearing and the general timelines that one can expect following a board decision, there really isn't a strict time frame that you can expect from the VA. So if there's any certainty that I can tell you, that is that there's no certainty. The only certainty is there's no certainty. You can dismiss any idea of having a board judge decision within a very specific time frame. It's not going to happen. Sometimes a board judge might issue a decision within 3 months following hearing, sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's 9 months, and there's a host of variables that can play into why it takes them longer or why it might not be as long. Sometimes the case might be complex. Sometimes the transcripts that are reduced from a hearing can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to be put into the record, depending on the type of audio that was recorded and if there was issues with the recording. But whatever the case, on average, a veteran can expect a decision from a board judge following a hearing in about 4 to 6 months. After the board judge issues a decision, if there's a remand or a grant, you can anticipate another 4 to 6 months before the VA executes the board judge's decision. Let's not forget there's a separation of authority and organizational structures between the Board of Veterans Appeals and the Veterans Benefits Administration. The Veterans Benefits Administration is the entity that's going to actually execute the Board of Veterans Appeals decision. And again, those things simply take time. So following a hearing, I would say 8 to 12 months, best case scenario, before you actually get money in the bank if it's a favorable decision. So hopefully that provides some general feedback or time frames for veterans to understand what type of time they should be expecting to wait. Now, keep in mind too, these are just averages. I've seen it take a year to year and a half before veterans get a board judge's decision. I've seen it take a month. But law of averages, which is hard to come by in the VA, 4 to 6 months to get that decision, 4 to 6 months for the VA to execute that decision.